This is your before and after story. Instead of imagining a rewarding career in medical imaging, Southeastern College can actually take you there. Prepare for a career in ultrasound, radiology, and X-ray technology with hands-on specialized training, simulations, and real-life experience with the latest imaging technology. You'll be ready to play a vital role on any healthcare team. Transform your life by helping others. Southeastern College. Your future is bright. Visit scc.edu to get started.
Due to the palpably negative effect it has on beer, cold side oxidation has become a major focus for many brewers, as it's known to rapidly turn what was originally a delicious beer into a sickly, sweet, icky mess. As such, many strategies have been developed to reduce the chances of oxidation, some mechanical in nature, though it seems more and more brewers these days are open to relying on chemical antioxidants. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this episode to discuss the impact adding sodium metabisulfite, or SMB, when packaging an American IPA is contributor Will Lovell.
Yeah, oxidation and ways to mitigate oxidation is one of those things that, at least in my brewing experience, really, really matters. And if you're hearing that from a guy that likes to warm ferment all of his lagers and does all sorts of other blasphemous brewing practices, then maybe this is a good listen for you, because obviously if it matters to me and a lot of the other things don't matter that much to me, then this really does matter.
There you go. And I know I've said it before, but for the last few years, or for the first few years that I brewed beer, in fact, I viewed the fear of cold side oxidation is largely meaningless. I mean, I was typically making beers that tasted perfectly fine without taking extreme measures to reduce oxygen exposure. Of course, I was mindful of oxidation, but it wasn't until I really started brewing more hoppy styles that I opened up to the idea that cold side oxidation may be at play. And after some experimentation, I did a complete 180 and began obsessing over cold side oxidation, which led me to exploring various chemical antioxidants. A few years back, we wondered if using SMB at the time of kegging might mitigate the oxygen exposure that occurs when racking to a non-purged keg, and we put it to the test. I look forward to getting into those results with you, Will. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where you make a small pledge that will earn you different rewards depending on the amount of that pledge. Look, over the years, we've heard from a bunch of patrons who tell us the rewards don't really matter to them that much, which is really, really cool of them. But we do enjoy giving you all a little something in return for your support. That said, we've actually been considering making some minor changes to the reward structure, and something we thought might be kind of cool is to offer patrons the opportunity to join us during a brew day every month, during which we would chat about our process, take questions, and just hang out, really. Anyway, to reiterate what I said recently, Patreon is truly our lifeblood right now, so massive thanks to everybody who supports us on that platform. You can check out all of the rewards we currently offer and become a patron today over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd really appreciate it. By doing so, those who haven't heard of us yet can more easily find the show. Plus, we really do like reading what you think about how we're doing. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who offer brewers various options for high-quality, reasonably priced electric brewing rigs in various voltages and sizes. I've used their 120-volt system for 5-gallon batches, as well as their 240-volt system for 10-gallon batches, and both are awesome. Clawhammer Supply really does put the effort into ensuring their systems do exactly as they're intended to do in as efficient a way as possible. And if you're not ready to make the jump to electric just yet, they also sell 10 and 20-gallon brew-in-a-bag homebrewing starter kits. Whatever it is you're looking for, do yourself a favor and visit clawhammersupply.com. We're confident you're going to love their stuff just as much as we do. Listener David Chang Sang left a question on our Facebook page after listening to last week's episode where we talked about Munich Helles. David said, "This was the style that got me hooked on brewing German lagers, all of them under pressure, and most have received medals from comps. It's probably a style I don't brew enough of, but I love it when I do." What do you say, Will?
I mean, obviously, I was the one that said it was a love letter to Munich Helles last week, and obviously, it's a style I really do love and geek out on. And having had the opportunity to have it fresh in Germany at several of the Munich breweries, Augustiner comes to mind off the top of my head. Like it is just such a wonderful beer. I do think I've warm fermented a lot of lagers. I recently got a 45 on a Munich Helles that was not the short and shoddy one we talked about, but another one that was warm fermented. And so I really don't think, I think a lot of this whole traditional stuff, I think it's great. Like if you want to do traditional lager brewing, if we're on a homebrew scale, like I think it's a fantastic thing. But I also think for those of you that are timid and don't, have all the equipment set up to maybe do the whole lager fermentation cold and then the extended lagering. I mean, don't be scared. Obviously, my experience and then also David's experience, it sounds like we're able to make some award-winning beers even with warm fermentation, in his case pressure fermentation. So rock on, David, keep doing what you do.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. My best scoring Vienna lager, not a Helles, of course, got a 44, and it was fermented at 67 degrees Fahrenheit. About 19 degrees C. So yeah, the warm fermentation thing is it's going to be very difficult to convince the old timers that it does seem to produce a decent beer that's not an ester bomb. I do want to say congratulations to David on his successes in the competition with a style that's often viewed as being a little bit more difficult than other styles to brew well. As you likely know, David, I'm highly skeptical of the claims regarding pressurized fermentation, as we've done several experiments comparing warm fermented lagers fermented under pressure to the same exact beer fermented at the same temperature, but without any pressure. And the results just continue to come back not significant, meaning that people can't really tell those beers apart. I still want to see some hard data on what fermentation under pressure actually does, how yeast react differently in such a way that it allows, adherence to traditional lager brewing methods to be okay with fermenting warm. I haven't seen it yet. I'm sure there's stuff out there. Email it to me. I'd be fascinated to read it, but I think the proof is in the pudding, right? If we make a beer that's warm fermented and it tastes exactly how we were hoping it would taste if we had cold fermented it or whatever, then I'm happy with it. And so that's kind of my take. That being said, as long as you're enjoying yourself and your brewing process and you like the beer that you make, that is what matters the most. So keep on keeping on, David. Thank you so much for reaching out. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. When we're back from this break, our focus will be on the use of sodium metabisulfite, that's SMB, when packaging an IPA.
Every day, predators are targeting children and teens online. The Department of Homeland Security's Know to Protect campaign provides resources to combat online child exploitation and abuse. Learn how you can help protect our kids online and join the fight. Visit knowtoprotect.gov so together we can stop online child exploitation. That's KNOW, 2, protect.gov.
As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
Imagine you're a business owner relying on a dozen different software programs, each one disconnected, more expensive, and more complicated than the last. It can be incredibly stressful, right? Now, picture Odoo. Odoo brings all the tools your business needs into one simple platform. CRM, accounting, inventory, manufacturing, marketing, HR, and more. All seamlessly connected. Everything works together, giving you the peace of mind that your business is running smoothly from every angle. Odoo's open source applications are user-friendly and designed to scale with your business, saving you time and money. Say goodbye to juggling multiple platforms and hello to efficient, integrated management. Stop wasting resources on complicated systems and make the switch to Odoo today. Visit odoo.com, ODOO.com. and discover how Odoo can simplify and streamline your business operations. Odoo, modern management made simple.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brewlosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
I have to imagine most homebrewers have had the experience of making a batch of IPA with a bunch of trendy, fruity, not to mention expensive hop varieties that initially tastes pretty good, though turns into a dull, lifeless, oftentimes oddly colored version of its former self soon after packaging. One of the primary culprits of this type of a disaster is cold side oxidation.
Oh man, if I wish I didn't have multiple stories like that to tell, but apparently I do, because cold side oxidation is a thing, especially in IPA. But cold side oxidation, what is it? Well, cold side oxidation occurs when beer is exposed to oxygen post-fermentation. And why that's a big deal is because during fermentation you have yeast, and yeast, what do? They'll eat up all that oxygen for you and return it with CO2. But post-fermentation, when the yeast is done doing their job, you now have the travesty of oxygen ingress to worry about. And so this can happen in the fermenter. Potentially if you're cold crashing and not, pressurizing your vessel, you can get that suck back of not only all the fluid from your blow off that was, in your blow off vessel, but also the air that comes along after it. You can do it when taking samples. I know people like to crack the lid of their fermenters all the time and look at it when they're new. And if you ever on a Facebook forum, people are always slapping their hands saying, just leave it alone. Don't look at it. If you keep looking at it, you're going to really cause some things to go wild in there. So not just infection, but again, oxidation. And so it can be juiced in the fermenter after fermentation. Another time that happens is during your transfers. We're going to talk about some mechanical methods to transfer, but back in the day, you talked about old school when we didn't worry about it. I remember just doing the siphon off into a keg, and as long as we didn't splash it too hard in the keg, we weren't going to get too much oxygen. And then there's always supposed to be this notable layer of CO2 on top that was going to cushion it because gases don't mix or anything, so that's transferring. And then obviously in the package itself, again, if you have a keg that you just dumped all the sanitizer out of and is sitting there, obviously you're getting air, which includes oxygen inside of that package. And so when you transfer it in there, again, as much as we want to believe that there's this cushion of CO2 there, and there might be some truth to it, nope, gases mix and you're exposing your beer to oxygen, which, is probably not a good thing for a hoppy beer style.
Yeah, for most styles, arguably. I mean, I remember, my story, which I think I've told in the past on other episodes focused on cold side oxidation. I was making beers, and I feel like I got lucky. I'm kind of anal anyways, as a brewer and in regular life. I follow, tend to try to stick to the rules. I really do pay attention to process, and I remember I never had a contaminated batch until I started doing things kind of halfway intentionally to create a contaminated batch, because I'm just a nut about this stuff. And I remember making these beers, and they were coming out so much better than even I expected. I mean, they were winning awards, they were scoring well in competitions. Even if they didn't take a medal, they were still scoring 38 and higher, in BJCP sanctioned competitions. I wasn't minding, cold side oxidation at all, until I realized, maybe they would be a little bit better if I tried that. And that kind of mindset came to me when I was interacting with a group of people online. We all have that now. I had it back, 12 years ago. And I made a comment about an American IPA that I made. And I said, I think my comment was something along the lines of, the hop smelled great in the bag, but clearly it was a bad lot, right? Like, because it just went away. And my buddy Dan said, have you considered the fact that it could be oxidation? And, I'm like, no, man, I've been brewing for years and that's never been an issue. And he's like, how would you know if it's an issue? You're the guy who tests this stuff out. Why don't you test it out? And so I did. And I believe that first batch was a hazy IPA that I really paid attention to cold side oxidation. And sure enough, that same sickly sweet kind of like dull hop character thing came through. So obviously where did that oxygen get in? I wasn't, I'd open up my freaking fermenter and put a turkey baster down in there and just pull some, of course you're getting oxygen exposure there. And then I'd transfer, like you said, I'd transfer over to kegs that weren't purged with the open lid, and I'm being gentle because of like that pillow of CO2 on the top. That's a lie. And then of course in the package, if you're not purging that keg in the first place, it's gonna be exposed. That beer's gonna get exposed to the oxygen that's just present in the keg. And I thought, man, there's so many different vectors of ingress here. And as soon as I eliminated all of those for this experiment, I was shocked at just how different the beer, how much more fresh, how much more poppy that hop character was. There's not much I would say that I stand on a pulpit and advocate for in brewing. The cold side oxidation, minding that, is one that I absolutely do. That's based on experimentation as well as my own personal experience. Now, what's weird is that I brewed many beers, and I've done even a couple of experiments on styles that weren't necessarily hoppy, like blonde ale or even some lagers, and they seem to be less sensitive to cold side oxidation when compared to hoppy beers. There is something about, and I know Scott Janisch has spoken to this and has looked into it far more deeply than we have, but there seems to be something about highly hopped beers that make them way more sensitive to oxidation. And maybe it's just that whatever oxidative impact occurs, you taste it more because of the way it interacts with hops or the hop terpenes and oils and such. I don't know, but it is fascinating to me that hoppy beers just and oddly enough, I feel like I'm going down a little path here. There are certain beers like, high alcohol beers like barley wine or imperial stout that seem to benefit from, in my opinion, at least, from a little bit of that oxidation that occurs over time, really kind of rounding out the characteristics of those styles. So just a fascinating subject altogether in my mind.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say oxidation is the hoppy beer's boogeyman, but when it comes to your imperial stouts and Belgian dark strongs and triples, a little bit of oxidation. Probably the reason you have to age those things is let them oxidate just a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
And then there's a curve, right? Because once it goes over that, and it gets to that kind of saturation point, then the beer starts going downhill, and you kind of lose some of those flavors again. So,
yeah.
So I was going to say, so I wouldn't, with this in mind, I wouldn't throw caution to the wind with some of the methods we're going to go with, even on like your dark strong, because I do think there are some things in packaging that get affected, even on those big beers, that if you don't mind your kind of P's and Q's on oxidation, it can still have long-term negative impact. But again, less sensitive, doesn't matter quite as much. But if you want your amber lager or your Helles or your dark strong to taste the way you want it to a little bit longer, probably minding your P's and Q's here is a good idea.
I will say too that barring high strength styles like barley wine, wheat wine, old ale, all of that, I am wholly of the opinion at this point that cold side oxidation is not good, that you want to avoid as much oxygen exposure as possible, and that you will be happier with the outcome of those beers. Again, outside of those very few styles that maybe benefit from a touch of oxidation, every other style, in my opinion, has tasted better when I started minding. No pun intended. P's and Q's means your pints and quarts, by the way, which is a beer reference. But when you mind those things, it really does seem to have a benefit. Now, what exactly is cold side oxidation anyways? Disclaimer, we are not chemists, so we're not going to get into the deep science of all of this. We're basically going to read off what we've studied over the last few years about this phenomenon that occurs with oxidation in beer. But the key behind it is what's called the redox reaction, which is just a chemical reaction that results in one substance losing electrons, which is referred to as oxidation, while another substance gains those electrons, which is referred to as reduction, hence redox reaction. Oxidation increases the rate of staling, which has a number of effects on beer character. The way that I had it explained to me at a homebrew club meeting many, many years ago was you can take, a piece of iron, let's say, put it out in the rain, and within 20 minutes, it's not going to rust up, but you give it a couple of days and it's going to start to develop rust. That is one way to think about what's happening with oxidation in beer as well. It's not the same mechanism. I understand that, but it gives me kind of a visual reference for how that works. It's why you can make a nice hoppy beer and it'll taste great the day after you keg it, but 1 week later you're like, what happened? Well, it rusted. This oxidation took hold and it is changing the actual chemical makeup of that beer. By reducing either oxygen's exposure in that beer through mechanical methods, which we'll get to in a minute, or by adding some other substance chemically, then what you're doing basically is reducing that oxygen, the amount of dissolved oxygen, again, whether through mechanical or chemical means, so that that reaction, that oxidative reaction, just doesn't occur. When it occurs, you will know, because it does not taste very good. There are many things that you can observe with your eyes, with your nose, and with your mouth when a beer has become notably oxidized. I'm not a big fan of the what used to be a very common descriptor used of oxidation, which was wet cardboard or wet paper. First off, I don't eat much wet paper or cardboard, so I'm not entirely sure where that came from. It sounds very creative and clever and fun and all, but to me, oxidation tastes like the inside. If you've ever eaten a lemon head, which I think most of us have, or any candy that's similar to that, like a Jawbreaker or whatever, just that sugary sweet center where you're like, it's boring now. I want to spit this out because it lost its flavor. That's what I get when I taste an oxidized, particularly oxidized hoppy beer. It's like it's got a little bit of that hint or a whisper of that fruitiness that you used to enjoy, but once it's gone, it's just this kind of sickly sweet, hard candy flavor that I'm not a big fan of. Obviously, I already mentioned this, but the dulling of the hop character, and I think those two kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I feel like we're a pharmaceutical commercial now. It's like, does your beer have oxidation? Are you suffering from these symptoms? So the sickly sweet hard candy, I always think of like a Jolly Rancher, where it's just kind of like that kind of thing. And again, if you're in a dark beer like an Imperial Stout, maybe a touch of this sickly sweet could come off as like sherry inside of a Boulder beer.
Right.
But inside of an IPA, it's just going to taste out of place and gross. I'm with you. The cardboard or wet paper, as someone that eats wet newspapers all the time, I don't get that from beer at all. Joking, I don't eat wet newspaper, but it's something fun to say.
I wonder.
As for the dulling hop character, this is probably the number one thing I've experienced, especially when I've tried to make hazy IPAs. Just kind of a side note. One time I have these keg minners still, but I used to ferment solely in these keg minners, and they have like a floating dip tube that goes to a post on, like a liquid post on top, and that's how you would get your beer in and out, which is really great for hoppy beers. But what I learned is that if I used vinyl tubing, and then my water is so hard that for whatever reason, when you combine Star Sand in my water, that vinyl tubing gets really slick. And I had an issue that if I didn't like dry out the end of the tube enough, it would slip off that little post. And if you're trying to like swap out floating dip tubes for your, Munich Helles, it's not such a crazy thing. But if you're trying to swap out floating dip tubes on your hazy IPA, all of a sudden, all those wonderful tropical aromatics that I was smelling, I think I had some Euconaut in there and some Citra and a whole lot of really great smelling hops, and all those things that I was smelling after dry hop kind of coming out the fermentation, like all those expected things, all of a sudden now just tasted like a lack of hops. Like all I got like this hazy IPA is pretty bland malt profile of nothing, and some little bit of hop, a little bit of like yeast character, and then basically an absence of hop flavor and aroma. And it happened so fast, so quick, and it was so gross. So that's pretty much the one that I've experienced the most. I do have heard about increased bitterness that can get kind of unpleasant, and I think I got a little bit of that with my hazy IPA because there was this weird bitter thing on the end that wasn't good. And then I think we've all been to the tap room before, and we ordered an IPA not realizing it was hazy, or maybe you ordered it on purpose, and you get like this grayish purpley sludge that comes out of this keg, and you're like, this doesn't even look good. This is gross. Like, why am I paying money for this particular sludge that we're about to just down? Ugh, so gross.
I'll tell you. So the increased bitterness thing, I don't know. Again, I don't know the chemistry that's going on and why this would happen, but I've heard that referred to as beta bitterness as opposed to that alpha acid, the isomerized alpha acid bitterness, that the beta acid bitterness reacts. There's something about the way, hop stuff reacts with oxygen again that causes those beta acids to become more prominent. And it's like you want to scrape it off your tongue. It's that level of bitterness. It's really not good. I have, this is complete theory on my part, but I remember drinking, professional commercial beers back in the day, early 2000s. You'd take a sip and you were like, oh, Jesus, that's bitter. And I'm wondering now if that was the earlier days of craft beer, not the earliest, but where, maybe they weren't minding their P's and their Q's as much as we do now and as much as commercial brewers do nowadays. But it is a really unpleasant bitterness. The color change to me, though, I feel like I've gotten fairly decent at being able to read oxidation in a beer just on the way it looks. If you ever brew a batch of beer that you think has a little bit of an odd taste, and you pour a sample and you kind of hold it up to a light, and right on the edges, you see a sort of grayish brown or purplish color just kind of glimmering off of it, chances are that's oxidation. Brown, obviously, if you're making a brown ale or something like that, I'm talking about, I've made pale lagers, and I'm doing this intentionally where I'm really trying to oxidize them. And even though they might taste okay, when I hold it up, I can just see that little hint of like grayish, brownish, purplish color on the edge of the beer. And that to me is a telltale sign. There's really not much else you're putting in that beer that would contribute that level of color. So if you see it, again, start minding your cold side oxidation, because that to me is the easiest way to tell if a beer is likely oxidized. So we're going to talk about methods for reducing cold side oxidation. I know that our focus on this episode is sodium metabisulfite, SMB, but I think it's only right to start with some of the mechanical methods, because that is what I think most of us at Brewlosophy and a lot of people can most easily employ in their process. Obviously, things like cold crashing under pressure. We've done experiments specifically on comparing beers that are cold crashed under pressure and those that are just cold crashed with an airlock on. When you cold crash, it creates a vacuum in that fermenter, and so it's going to suck in something. And so if you have some way of connecting CO2, whether that's in a balloon or a tank, it's going to suck in CO2, which is inert. It's not going to affect the beer flavor or anything like that. If you don't do that, you're sucking in the ambient air that is just around your fermenter, which most of the time is going to contain some level of oxygen that you now have to worry about affecting your beer. So cold crashing under some level of CO2 pressure is the way to go there. Probably the biggest, in my opinion, culprit for cold side oxidation, though, has to do with the packaging process and then kind of subsequently what is in the keg at the time that you package. I've found that just by minding my cold crashing and then transferring beer under pressure into a keg that's been purged of CO2, I fill it up with Star San solution, and then I pump out the Star San solution either using CO2 that's naturally produced during fermentation or from a tank. Now you've got this entire closed system that's just full of CO2 that you're replacing with beer, and ostensibly no oxygen is exposing itself to the beer, and it's worked insanely well for me, those mechanical methods.
Yeah, and even if you're bottle conditioning, I still think it's worth, and I think we've talked about this before, if you have just a random keg for bottle conditioning or a way to kind of bottle condition from something that's been, not just a bucket that's open air, even going straight from your fermenter where it's a closed system, if you can, I would definitely try to again, purge the bottles of CO2, and then, I would usually take a keg, put my priming sugar in the bottom, and then pressure transfer into a CO2 purged keg as best you can, and then then use a bottling wand and just flush all those bottles with CO2, fill them up, and then try to this yeast will get rid of any other remaining oxygen that's in there, but I would still limit the amount of oxygen you let into your bottle conditioned beers. And then I don't know, you didn't really have this in the show notes per se, but I think this is a good place to talk about it. Temperature is something that we know affects redox reactions. While things are cold, redox reactions don't happen as fast. So even if you mind all of your P's and Q's, storing your beer cold, and if you need, and probably drinking it fresh is probably one of the better ideas here. And that, I think that falls as much under the mechanical side of things as anything else.
Yeah, no, that's a great point as well. If you have, oxygen exposure, keeping that beer cold is going to delay the reaction. And so maybe you can enjoy that. I actually think that that's part of what contributed to me not thinking that oxygen or oxidation was a big deal, is that I'd brew a batch of beer. I like fresh beer, and it hit the keg, and be fully carbonated 2 or 3 days after brewing it. And then it'd be gone in 5 days after that, because all my friends would come over and drink it. And maybe we just were having the good, having the beer and it tasted good because oxidation hadn't occurred yet. So good point on keeping it cold. In terms of chemical methods for reducing the risk of cold side oxidation, we've talked about in the past ascorbic acid. That's one method some people use. I'm not sure it's nearly as effective as metabisulfites or sulfites in general, which are a known, and widely used in the food industry antioxidant. It comes in a couple of forms. Often people have, brewers definitely know of Campton tablets, which my understanding is those are, half a gram or half ounce tablets or something like that contain almost the right amount of, almost the exact same amount of actual metabisulfite as what we would use to put into the package to reduce cold side oxidation or to eliminate the oxygen that was exposed to that beer during the packaging process. So they're very convenient. They do cost a little bit more because they're convenient and convenient costs. You can just buy a bag of sodium or potassium metabisulfite. People get a little bit hung up on the sodium or potassium thing. K-Meta is potassium metabisulfite. Campton is sodium metabisulfite. They do the same exact thing for this purpose, and I really don't think that you're going to taste much of a difference between the sodium and the potassium. Do you have thoughts on that, Will?
So supposedly sodium, has a lower taste threshold. So you're more likely to taste sodium over potassium. What's kind of fun is, because sodium's in salt, right? So we associate with saltiness. Sodium and potassium are both, I know we weren't going to get into chemistry, but they're both alkali earth metals. And so potassium is actually used for like salt substitute, right? So, but you just have to use more of it to get that same kind of saltiness. And alkali earth metals, fun fact, are my favorite metals on the periodic table and my favorite elements because in their pure form, they catch and combust when exposed to water. You don't find them in their pure form. Otherwise, we couldn't eat salt and things like that. But fun little facts. But yeah, so I tend to keep potassium metabisulfite on hand. I also think potassium's just kind of fun to say over sodium, and it sounds a little more exotic to me for whatever reason. But I don't think I would hesitate to use either one. But if you are worried about the taste threshold of sodium versus potassium, apparently you can add a little bit more potassium before you reach that tasting threshold. And so if that is something that worries you, go for it. If you struggle with high sodium levels in your, whatever blood work you're getting, maybe you'd use the potassium instead. But we're using such small amounts here, I don't think it really matters. Just use what you have.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is for the purposes of scrubbing oxygen from the package, right? We're going to get into how much you use in here in a minute. You use so little that I would almost guarantee the sodium and potassium content of either, Campton or K-Meta. It doesn't matter. So how do the sulfites work though? Again, we're not chemists, so we're going to keep it basic. It allows free sulfide ions to bind with free oxygen whenever it's dissolved into a solution, thus eliminating the dissolved oxygen and hence reducing the oxidative effects. So again, this is the redox we're eliminating that redox reaction by first having the sulfites bind with those free oxygen molecules or ions, and then that's what happens is that oxygen is effectively no longer capable of going forward with this redox reaction once it's in the beer. So, you hear stuff like this, and then you hear that all you have to add is 0.3 grams per 5-gallon batch. 0.3 grams, not 3 grams, not even a half a gram per 5-gallon batch of beer. It is like the littlest pinch that you can add to a batch. And we've been able to show over and over that it does seem to have some impact in certain situations. And so, again, 0.3 grams, even if you have sodium issues, I don't think that's going to affect you very much. I'm not here advocating that you use it, but it's kind of an interesting thing. So
it's actually a pain in the butt to measure. If you've ever measured 0.3 grams of something, it's actually really hard to measure that small of an amount.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think every brewer should have some kind of potassium or sodium metabisulfite on hand. The amount of things you can use, it drops chlorine and chloramines out of solution in your water. It reduces oxidation if you use it in packaging. If you like to brew ciders or meads and back sweeten, you can add either potassium sodium metabisulfite along with some sorbates there, and you can drop some, sterilize that yeast that, so you can back sweeten those kinds of things. So to me, it is like a Swiss Army knife of like something that you should probably have on hand anyways. And it's dirt cheap and you don't use very much of it. Even when you use it for back sweetening purposes, trying to sterilize yeast, it's still only like a few grams. So it's such a tiny amount. So I honestly think that you should every brewer should have it. That is unless you might have some kind of allergic sensitivity to it.
Yeah.
Or you have family members coming, friends or family coming over that are sensitive to this stuff. That's stuff to keep in mind. But, as far as health issues related to your sodium consumption, I don't think that's going to really come up in this dilute of a solution of it.
Yeah, right. And I just looked it up on morebeer.com. A 1 pound bag of PMB of K-Meta, the potassium metabisulfite, $12. You're using 0.3 grams for the purposes of scrubbing oxygen. That will last you your entire brewing career. I mean, that is so little. Now, if you're using it to scrub oxygen from your brewing liquor or to reduce chlorine and chloramines, obviously you're using almost an equal amount. A very, very small amount is all that's needed for all of these purposes. It really is a multi-purpose tool, in my opinion, that every brewer should have on hand so long as they're not allergic to it. Now, I will tell a little story that I've told before. I was making cider one time, and I use metabisulfites to drop the yeast out of solution before back sweetening. It works beautifully. I do blend it. This was Drew Beecham's recommendation. I blend it with a little sorbate just to really cover my bases there. But I opened the bag of K-Meta a little too fast, and a little cloud of it came out. And it triggered I have exercise-induced asthma because my mom smoked in the house when I was a kid. I haven't experienced any issues in years, and that triggered it a little bit. I started wheezing, and I can only imagine what this would do to somebody who's truly asthmatic. So be careful with this stuff. If you are of that ilk and you have that level of sensitivity, I would recommend probably just spending a little extra on Campton tablets because they are compressed and they're not going to throw dust in your face. It's a lot easier to use. So just some thoughts about the health sensitivities. You really do want to be mindful of that. And if you're brewing beers, even with 0.3 grams, of sulfites per 5-gallon batch, let people know. I mean, that's just the kind thing to do. If they are sensitive to it, even if the sulfites are no longer present in the beer because they've been used up, whatever, just let them know. I think that's the safe thing to do. Now, we are for the experiment we're going to talk about in the next segment. We did focus on American IPA, that classic, crisp, and clear version of a hoppy ale, which the BJCP describes as a decidedly hoppy and bitter, moderately strong, pale American ale. The balance is hop forward with a clean fermentation profile, dryish finish, and clean supporting malt, allowing a creative range of hop character to shine through. So let's talk a little bit about cold side oxidation, specifically in American IPA, which is clear. I think a lot of the focus nowadays with CSO gets put on hazy IPA, but I've absolutely made a classic, clear West Coast and American style IPA that have been oxidized.
Yeah, I think especially if you're using any of these kind of more recent, like fruity kind of hops, like we know that Citra and Mosaic and a lot of these things are very sensitive to oxidation and oxygen exposures, especially inside of the beer. So I think whenever you're talking about IPA, I don't care if it's hazy IPA, American IPA, or even some of these new cold IPA and West Coast pills, I think minding your P's and Q's on oxidation, just because the hops you're using are obviously very, very sensitive to being exposed to oxygen. So to me, it's a no-brainer that you would do it on any IPA or hoppy beer, and maybe do it on any other kind of beer too, but especially these hoppy ones like American IPA. So, and if SMB is effective, and you're only adding 0.3 grams at packaging to mitigate oxygen exposure and to drop that oxygen out, I mean, seems like it'd be pretty cheap insurance here to make sure that your wonderful hoppy beer that you just spent all this money on hops, which is one of your most expensive ingredients apart from yeast, to make sure that all that nice, good hop aroma and flavor stays in the package. So that's all. I mean, my experience doing it, it's super easy. It's super effective. I like to add it at the same time as gelatin whenever I'm doing these beers, because if you're already going to have to pop open a keg lid, or if you're already going to put gelatin in the bottom of the keg, you might as well throw some sodium metabisulfite or potassium metabisulfite in there just to kind of scrub that oxygen there at packaging and protect all that hoppy, flavorful goodness that you want to get in that package.
Yeah, just to reiterate, it is not difficult to do. It is an extra step. So if you hate adding new steps, which I can relate with, you're gonna have to deal with that. But it's so easy to do. Of course, you only need to do it if it's effective. I mentioned it earlier that my obsession with cold side oxidation really was spurred on by my absolute displeasure of a few batches of IPA that I made that turned out way worse than I expected. They all tasted good at packaging, and then about a week later, I'm left going, what the hell happened? Well, when I started employing methods to reduce oxidation, in my case, usually mechanical, my beer improved. Is the chemical antioxidant known as metabisulfite just as effective as these mechanical methods that I was using? Well, we tested it out, and we'll be getting into those results when we're back from this break.
Every day, predators are targeting children and teens online. The Department of Homeland Security's Know to Protect campaign provides resources to combat online child exploitation and abuse. Learn how you can help protect our kids online and join the fight. Visit knowtoprotect.gov so together we can stop online child exploitation. That's KNOW, the number 2, protect.gov.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today.
Imagine you're a business owner relying on a dozen different software programs, each one disconnected, more expensive, and more complicated than the last. It can be incredibly stressful, right? Now, picture Odoo. Odoo brings all the tools your business needs into one simple platform. CRM, accounting, inventory, manufacturing, marketing, HR, and more. All seamlessly connected. Everything works together, giving you the peace of mind that your business is running smoothly from every angle. Odoo's open source applications are user-friendly and designed to scale with your business, saving you time and money. Say goodbye to juggling multiple platforms and hello to efficient, integrated management. Stop wasting resources on complicated systems and make the switch to Odoo today. Visit odoo.com, ODOO.com. and discover how Odoo can simplify and streamline your business operations. Odoo, modern management made simple.
Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. If you've ever taken a big tug of an IPA that was oxidized, you know very well the feeling of disappointment it can cause, especially if it's a beer that you made yourself and that you spent the money on the hops for. Ugh, it sucks so bad. These days, we have a number of options that are purported to reduce the risk of cold side oxidation, one of which involves adding a very small amount of sodium metabisulfite, SMB, at the time of packaging. To better understand the effectiveness of this method, we put it to the test.
Yes, so this experiment was actually performed by Phil Rusher, a kind of former contributor, as it were, and he did 2 5.5-gallon batches of American IPA with a malt bill of 77% Pilsner malt, 15% Vienna malt, 7.5% wheat malt, and then 0.5% of roasted barley for color. A lot of those American IPAs, they want them a little bit brown, on the brown side, like a little darker than you would associate with the West Coast IPA. But I do like the fact that he used mostly Pilsner malt for this, just to kind of make sure we get that really light color there to kind of emphasize it. And so basically his brewing process, he collected 2 identical volumes of RO water in a claw hammer supply 240 volt unit. He mashed in his grains at 155C or 155F or 68C for 60 minutes. When the mash was complete, he removed the grains and proceeded to boil the worts for 60 minutes. And then he had the following hop regimen. So he had 20 grams of Laurel at 60 minutes, 30 grams of Enigma at 20 minutes, 25 grams of Enigma plus 25 grams of Mandarina Bavaria at 10 minutes, and then 25 grams of Enigma plus 25 grams of Mandarina Bavaria again at 1 minute. Man, Mandarina Bavaria, I've had some beers of that. I haven't seen that hop used in quite a while, so that's pretty cool that he was using some of those hops like that.
Well, I would say that somebody got a batch of hops for the Hop Chronicles and decided to use them for something else here, which I think is really interesting. This is a little offshoot, but Laurel, you don't hear it talked about much these days. If you haven't tried Laurel hops, and they're still available out there, pick some up. They're relatively inexpensive and really fabulous. But yeah, I agree. Kind of an interesting hop blend on this. I have a feeling Phil was doing a little bit of experimentation just flavor-wise for himself as well.
Yeah, and the beers I've had with Mandarina Bavaria in them have been pretty tasty. So this Enigma plus Mandarina Bavaria sounds like a really great combination to me. It's kind of got me interested to maybe go try something about that myself. So anyways, after the boil, the worts were chilled and then transferred to sanitized fermenters. And the OG for both, apparently he nailed it, where it was 1058 for both of them. So that's pretty awesome. It always feels good when you nail your OGs onto identical batches. And then he pitched a single pouch of Imperial yeast A15 Independence into each wort. And then the beers were fermented at around 66F or 19C, which seems pretty on par for an American IPA so far.
Yeah. Have you used that A15 Independence wort?
I actually have not been able to use A15 Independence, but it sounds like a pretty cool yeast. I've always kind of wanted to check it out.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it is I could be off on this, but I thought it came from Anchor Brewery, but it was what they used for their IPA. It could be some other classic brewery that uses it for their hoppy beers. It's a pretty unique yeast, one that I would imagine is, it's going to do the same thing more or less as any other yeast in a hoppy beer. So, he's setting this one up to be your kind of, it is an American style clean fermenting ale yeast. That's the point I wanted to make. So any impact of oxidation should really still, show through in a beer fermented with that yeast, which isn't as popular as say Flagship, which is the Chico strain, or any of the other popular American yeast strains. So far on par, fermented at 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19C. And then after 5 days, he added those dry hops, which were again 50 grams of Enigma and another 25 grams of Mandarina Bavaria. I would have loved to have tried this beer. It's such an interesting hop combo.
I know. I'm just sitting here. I'm like, the wheels are turning every time we say Enigma plus Mandarina Bavaria. So, but with the activity absent after another 5 days later, Phil took his hydrometer readings, showing both beers were done fermenting at around 1014. So that's awesome. Anytime you start out on an experiment and you hit your OG for both and your FG for both, and they're pretty much identical, that always makes you feel pretty good. And so at this point, now is where the variable is introduced. Both these beers were transferred under pressure to non-purged kegs, meaning he did not do anything, mechanical or otherwise, to get the air out of those kegs. I'm just assuming that he filled them up with sanitizer, sanitized them real good, dumped out the sanitizer, and then any of that space that was there is now open to the air, and then he shut the lid on it, and then he pressure transferred the beer into these non-purged kegs, and one of which had received 0.3 grams of SMB, or sodium metabisulfite, while the other one had no additions. So pretty big leap of faith here to have non-CO2 purged kegs and just trying to put all that faith in that tiny little 0.3 grams of sodium metabisulfite.
So let's talk about this for a minute, because this is, we talked about in the last segment, there are, at least in my mind, three main vectors for oxygen ingress on the cold side. You've got in the fermenter. So if you're cold crashing, not without some form of CO2 to come back into your, to replace or to fill that vacuum that's created when you chill that beer down, if you're transferring without any, paying any attention to oxygen exposure, that can happen. So for example, if you're letting your beer fall through the air into the package, that, that's could negatively affect your beer. You're exposing the beer to oxygen. And then getting into a keg that has air in it or a package, whether it's a bottle or a keg. So what he did is he didn't cold crash at all. So we kind of eliminated that variable, that piece of it. He transferred them into the kegs under pressure. And the main reason for that is because his normal routine involves, ball lock disconnects going onto the keg. So he transfers through from the fermentation vessel into the kegs through the liquid outpost. So, there's very little, if any, oxygen exposure there. So what we are really isolating here is the impact of just transferring a hoppy beer to a keg that was not purged, one of which has this, magical solution purportedly to reduce cold side oxidation through the processes we discussed earlier, and one that does not. This to me, I love this stuff. Now, this is a little bit of a disclaimer here as well. This was done during COVID. We had already done another experiment similar to this, but it was not on an American IPA. I believe it was on Kolsch. And you can go find that one on our website and read about those results. But in this case, we had to do our COVID protocol. So you think about, he's brewing these 10 gallons of beer. This is the context within which, Phil was doing this, that he's really not going to be able to share with many people because of lockdowns and all of that stuff. One of which he's absolutely risking being bad if this stuff doesn't work, right? Or maybe even both batches bad if the SMB doesn't work. So I think it's an interesting setup. And, at this point, you're keeping your fingers crossed. Is this tiny little amount, this dusting of SMB really going to reduce the impact of the exposure that beer had to oxygen because of that keg not being purged? Really neat design here.
Well, and as someone that's done a similar experiment with a different antioxidant, when you're doing this and you're brewing these beers and you're not CO2 purge these kegs, you're like, am I just an idiot? Like, am I really wasting this many hours of my time on what's going to probably be a bunch of oxidized beer that's going to taste like crap? Like, it literally goes through your head like that. And like, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm just an idiot that's dumb enough to do this. Way to go, Brewlosophy, for sucking me into it. It's like normally I get drinkable beer, but at the end of this one, with all this fun Enigma and Mandarin Bavaria hops, we're going to end up with this sickly, sweet, disgusting mess. It'll be great. So anyways,
I remember though, Will, it's funny when we first started doing the experiment series, probably 2 years into it or so, I was talking to, there's this local dude, great guy who's been in the homebrew club. I think he helped to start our local homebrew club here. But he said, you realize you have to have a certain level of, be somewhat moronic in order to do what you're doing. Like, you are perfectly comfortable getting these ingredients, spending all of the time it takes to brew 2 batches, and potentially ending up with a keg that is going to go down the drain. He's like, that takes a level of okay with messing up, which he referred to as moronic, that a lot of people don't have. And I think for those of us who do the Brewlosophy thing, that's kind of the fun of it. That becomes the hobby, is testing those limits and checking it out. And we love sharing the data. So anyways, are we idiots for doing that? On some level, Will, I would say that yes, we are. On some level,
not only that, but you're an idiot enough to serve it to 20 other people.
and get their potentially terrible feedback. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, this beer tastes like crap. I'm like, yeah, it did.
Yeah, it sure does.
Trust me, I know. I tried it before you did. Sorry. So anyways, at least I've established myself as a decent brewer locally for the most part. But yeah, these things are hard. But so the filled kegs, they replaced it as Keyser, buttered carbonated overnight before the gas was reduced serving pressure, and then left to condition for a week. And then after just 1 week in the keg, there was a dramatic difference in color in these beers. And I have the pictures up on the website. Y'all can go to brewlosophy.com if you want to follow along at home. But the one dose with SMB was nice and yellow, like kind of what you would expect. And then the other non-dose version was kind of getting that little orangey, grayish hue that we were talking about earlier. It does not look like, when you look at them side by side, especially knowing of the Pilsner malt that's in there, one definitely looks much, much darker.
Yeah. We often say that subjective or preference is subjective, right? And I have studied perception. It's what drove me into the field that I am in my real life, right? As a psychologist, I love the human condition and the subjectivity of the way we perceive things. But, if we're all looking at the same exact thing and you see these beers, there's not many people on earth who don't have some sort of an issue with their sight, who are going to look at this and be like, yeah, they look exactly the same. I mean, they are so obviously different, which to me allows us to say with some level of objectivity, okay, something happened here. That SMB did something. And again, the one that was dosed with SMB looks way more like the IPA that Phil kegged. The one that wasn't dosed looks quite a bit darker. And that, again, is a telltale sign. How many people out there who are brewing IPAs and who have been convinced that when they package it, they got to let it sit in the package for 3 to 4 weeks before they drink it, and then they pour out a sort of brown-looking IPA, and they think that's just the way this beer tastes, when really it could have been so much better, right at packaging, or if you had minded those cold side oxidation factors. It's just wild to me that in 1 week, you can't see it here. Go to the website, click the link in the description of this episode to go look at the picture of these beers. They are so drastically different different, and that is just on site alone. To me, I want that paler one. I would want the one just based on the way they look that was dosed with SMB. That one on the right, I already have an association with that color when it comes to IPA. No thanks.
Now, if you, granted, we got to look at the malt bill a little earlier. If you had told me you'd put in a pretty heavy charge of Munich malt or something into your American IPA for whatever reason, or you're leaning more towards that darker IPA, but the fact that it's mostly like Pilsner malt with a touch of Vienna really and some wheat, like this is obviously for that grist way too dark on the right for that.
Right.
Now if they would have nobody likes to put caramel malt in their IPAs anymore except for me and Steve Thanos, but if it was me and Steve, we would have maybe put some caramel malt in there. We would have maybe put like some Munich malt in there, but anybody else doesn't do that. And so obviously the one on the left looks more like what you would expect from an American IPA, especially with that grist.
Yeah, you stole the words out of my mouth. I was going to say that color of IPA is perfectly typical for Steve Thanos because he likes that, what we refer to as a Midwest IPA, which is more malty. It has more of that caramely flavor, which can pair really well with hops. But I'll tell you, I've had beers that are designed that way that are oxidized still, and they still take on that kind of grayish tint as opposed to that nice malty brown color. And they taste sickly sweet, all the same descriptors we talked about earlier. So now, again, this was done during the time of COVID when we had to come up with a new way to keep the content coming, but that doesn't rely on getting other participants. So what we did was we would do we typically do 5 or 6 trials ourselves and report that back under the My Impressions section of every experiment. But in this case, that was the sole way, the kind of data that we were reporting on. And so what we would do is set up 10 personal triangle test trials, out of which we would be expected to get 7 guesses right in order for us to say that they were more than just guesses, really, that there does seem to be something about these beers that's different enough for us to tell apart consistently. And mind you, that is knowing full well what the variable is. We brewed the beers. We did all of that. The only thing is that we're having somebody else, usually our spouses or our kids, serve us the triangle, and they're mixing them up and doing things differently. So out of the 10 trials that Phil did, again, he needed 7. He got every single triangle test attempt correct, meaning this was a very easily significant experiment. He was so easily able to reliably tell these beers apart, and it wasn't based on appearance. Again, we do not factor appearance into the triangle test. We hide that by serving these beers in opaque cups. You cannot look at the beer. I mean, you could look down the cup if you want to. That usually is not going to reveal much. In this case, just based on flavor and aroma and mouthfeel potentially, Phil was able to reliably tell apart these beers every single time he did a triangle test.
Yeah, and his description's interesting. He said he perceived both these beers as having tangerine, blackcurrant, blueberry characteristics with a cracker and somewhat biscuity malt flavor. He just felt the hop flavor and the aroma were somewhat muted in both, though the one dosed with SMB was definitely more crisp and bright than the non-dosed beer. And while he preferred the beer dosed with SMB at packaging, he still detected low levels of cardboard-like oxidation in it that he felt worsened over time. So I think this just goes to show you that when you're fighting oxidation, I think it's more of like a layered approach. You're just doing a lot of things to like mitigate effects all the way down the line, right? So it shows you that even though SMB, sodium metabisulfite and probably potassium metabisulfite, which isn't the topic of this experiment specifically, these sulfites can assist in mitigating these effects, and they're pretty cheap and easy insurance at the dosage levels that you're doing, but also those mechanical methods of making sure that you're pressurizing vessels under cold crash and pressure transferring and making sure that your kegging vessel is purged with CO2. All of these things are kind of layered approaches to really reduce this culprit of staling and robbing you of flavor. So I think this just goes to show you that the fact that he thought they were both a little bit oxidized, and maybe he was a little bit biased too because he knew what was going on, shows that we just really need to take this as a layered approach when we go through all these things. But so sodium metabisulfite is absolutely a win. The fact that it was more crisp and bright shows that sodium metabisulfite is absolute win. Really cheap insurance, really great thing. But again, let's layer our approach with all this, and let's kind of employ not one of these methods per se, but multiple of these methods to mitigate these effects.
Yeah, the way I look at these results, it seem to insinuate that maybe the sodium metabisulfite didn't scrub all of the oxygen, possibly. Maybe there was just too much oxygen in this beer to have, really the SMB that it didn't, fully take it out. I use SM7B mics and I have to fight myself from not saying SM7B, the SMB. But like you said, it is so obvious that the SMB had a positive impact on this beer, and just based on appearance alone, but also, Phil's feedback, his abilities and all of that to distinguish these beers. Here's what the way I think about it. I agree with you on your layered approach. There are so many mechanical ways to reduce cold side oxidation that are so easy to implement that if you're going through the effort to make beer in the first place, add a little bit more effort on your cold side process, and I think you will benefit from it. I think you'll be pleased with the outcome. Now, if you think about, but I don't want to use chemicals. You're consuming sulfites on the daily if you're eating processed food in America. I mean, that's just, it's an antioxidant that is used and preservative that's used in so many things. So you're using such a small amount. You buy a bag of sulfites, whether of metabisulfite, whether sodium or potassium. To me, in my mind, the two biggest issues outside of contamination that negatively impact beer character are water quality, usually water with chlorine or chloramines in it, and cold side oxidation. Those kind of bookend the rest of the brewing process. You pick up some SMB, you toss a little bit into your brewing liquor prior to brewing, it knocks out that chlorine and chloramine, and then you toss a little bit in your keg at packaging so that it knocks out that oxygen. You've got this incredible chemical that is so easy to use, fairly safe. I mean, for those who don't have allergies, and it has this huge impact on the two most important aspects, in my mind, of beer character, beer quality. I mean, why not just use a little bit and you will have a bag forever? To me, when I learned of this stuff and I realized just how powerful it is, I'm with you. This stuff is just crazy good. I've got a bag of SMB and a bag of K-Meta of PMB in my freezer right now. Both bags I've had for 4 years and they still feel full. And I make cider with those. I do so much stuff with them. You use so little. I sound like this is like a sales pitch for, picking up some SMB or PMB, and it's kind of because it is. I really think people would be shocked with how good their beer could be by implementing these types of techniques, including both chemical and mechanical approaches to reducing CSO.
Absolutely. And again, as we discussed earlier, it is a Swiss Army knife of a thing.
Yes.
And so just really, there's so many opportunities to use this in cider making, mead making, along with beer. And so why wouldn't you keep this on hand? And it's so cheap. I forget what you said the cost was $1, but it was basically nothing. I mean, just throw it on your next more beer order to get the free shipping, kind of thing. If you're a few bucks off, throw it on your next more beer order. It'll be easy enough. And then, you don't have to keep both. Marshall has both, but just pick one. Pick potassium, pick sodium. They're both, again, very similar. Sodium and potassium are both alkali earth metals. It's just kind of what else they're bonded with here. So just pick one. They both are effective based off of our experimentation, although we did focus on sodium today, sodium metabisulfite today. So, but yeah, just throw it in there. If you're already taking all this time and effort, and then even if, like for me, I like to use gelatin. Some people like to use Biofine. If you're already adding these things to packaging, what's this one more little bit of whisper of dust, basically, that you're throwing in there along with it? So just throw that in there, too, for the extra insurance so that you're not adding anything else or you're scrubbing out the little oxygen that might be getting in there with your Biofine or your gelatin. Because really, it's super simple, super easy. And this layered approach of trying to fight off oxidation will greatly, greatly improve your beer.
Yeah, and to your point about adding it with gelatin, you think about so in my brewing, right? I'm gonna pressure transfer. I'm gonna cold crash under pressure. I'm gonna do all of those mechanical things. I'm also gonna purge my keg with CO2. But if I want to add gelatin, people will ask, well, how do you do that in a way that doesn't introduce oxygen? Well, the amount of oxygen you're introducing when you add that gelatin, whether it's in the fermentation vessel, but usually in the keg when you're using something like metabisulfites, that amount of oxygen is easily less than what would be there if you didn't purge that keg in the first place. So by adding a little bit of that metabisulfite, what you're doing is basically taking care of just the tiny little bit of oxygen that was introduced throughout the process, which is, again, way less than what would be in the keg anyways. Imagine the effect that has. I mean, I just think it's really neat. So we got a couple of reader comments I want to get to. The first one comes from Matt, who says, I wonder how these cold side oxidation experiments would play out with bottle conditioning. I bottle conditioned would like to improve on the cold side oxidation front. Will, you mentioned a little bit about it before, but have you ever actually used sulfites when you're bottle conditioning?
I actually haven't. I don't bottle condition a bunch anymore. Usually if I'm bottle conditioning, I actually tend to take it like straight off my fermenter, because, and then maybe adding like a carb drop or something in there. If I wasn't going to use carb drops, I was going to bottle condition more, then I would take a spare keg and just put some sugar in there and then pressure transfer into a CO2 purge keg with the sugar in the bottom. So I actually haven't done it, the K-Meta or sodium metabisulfite at bottle conditioning, although that would be kind of interesting to do.
Yeah, I've never done it either. I absolutely hate bottle conditioning. I'm known for that, but I did do some research on this in the past because my brother was, when he was brewing, he was bottle conditioning, and I thought, man, what can I do to help him, with oxidation, all this stuff. Apparently, the amount of metabisulfite that you're using for the purposes of scrubbing oxygen is way less than what you would use for the purposes of knocking yeast out. So it does work, is what I've read online. It's now, again, this is not coming from my own anecdote. It's coming from my online research. So make of that what you will. But I do believe at 0.3 grams for a 5 gallon or 19 liter batch, you're probably going to be safe. There's still going to be yeast in solution, and those yeast will be more than enough to carbonate your beer with a little bit of priming sugar. So the only way to know is to try it out for yourself. I would give it a go. Worst case scenario, you have to, drink some still beer, I guess, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So final comment comes from Mike, who says, I'm sure there's an easy answer for this, but I cannot figure it out. I purge my keg by pushing sanitizer out with CO2. How do I get the SMB into the keg without filling the keg right back up with oxygen again? We just sort of touched on this a little bit. First off, by putting it in there, you are not going to fill that keg with oxygen. CO2 is heavier than oxygen. Yes, gases mix. There's going to be some mixing of oxygen with the CO2 that's in your keg post-purge. But if you're gentle enough and you add it in there, it's going to scrub that oxygen, ostensibly again, more than enough to get rid of that oxygen that you are introducing at the time. I would think, at least.
So I typically, like, for when I brew for myself, not just experiments, but when I brew for myself, if I'm adding the sodium metabisulfite or potassium metabisulfite, I'm usually doing it along with gelatin. And I have a couple of different ways that I add gelatin to my beers, and you could potentially mix it in with some distilled water and add it in a very similar way. And you wouldn't need very much, but one way, and this is the way that I believe Jordan Folks uses, is you can take like a Topo Chico or a San Pellegrino bottle and sanitize it, and then you get a carb cap, and you can put your gelatin solution in there along with your potassium metabisulfite or sodium metabisulfite, and then you just kind of like keep the cap loose and purge the air out of your little San Pellegrino or Topo Chico bottle, tighten the carb cap, and then pressurize it a little bit, and as long as the pressure of that bottle is higher than the pressure of your keg, it'll literally just suck all that liquid from the dip tube going to the bottom of that bottle. That's kind of one way that I've done it. The other way that I'm more likely to do it, which is also kind of interesting, is I'll actually, if I'm going to add gelatin, again, I'll do my whole, it's filled with sanitizer, push it all out with CO2, but then I'll take the lid off before I add the beer. I'll dump in the gelatin and the K-Meta or sodium metabisulfite and put the lid back on, and then I'll even just kind of do a little fill purge where you just fill it up with CO2, let it sit for a second, purge the air out, fill it up with CO2, again, pull the PRV valve, purge it out, and I'll do that 3 or 4 times. Again, mitigating all that oxygen in there. It uses a little more CO2, but it's kind of not as big a pain as using the Topo Chico bottle. So I've done both. I've done both of these, and then I'll just rack from the fermenter on into my keg from there. And again, because of the the Camden, the sodium potassium metabisulfite that was used, and the as I call it, the fill purge method, I feel pretty confident that there's a very minimal amount of air or oxygen that's still in there.
Yeah, great tips and a great way to wrap up this episode. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Brewlosophy Show, at youtube.com/@The Brewlosophy Show. That's the @ symbol followed by The Brewlosophy Show. No umlaut needed. And as always, you can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on brewlosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.